Association and Officer Bookman's attorney. It's D-A-V-I-D-R-O-G-E-R. With me here today is Steve Grammas, S-T-E-V-E, Grammas, G-R-A-M-M-A-S. He's the president of Las Vegas Police Protective Association. Now, our intent is to give you a brief presentation of maybe some evidence that you're not familiar with and offer you perhaps a different perspective of this case. As you know, the Clark County Grand Jury heard testimony over a number of days. The prosecution put on witnesses. We were allowed to put on a couple of our experts as well as testimony from Officer Bookman. Last night, the Clark County Grand Jury declined to indict Officer Alex Bookman on murder charges. And so at the end of this presentation, we'll answer as many or all of your questions that we have answers to. And so if you would be kind enough to hold your questions until the end. And President Steve Grammas would like to have a few comments.
All right, good morning, everybody. As David said, President Steve Grammas, S-T-E-V-E-G-R-A-M-M-A-S. Yeah, first of all, thank you guys for coming out today. This is something that has weighed heavily on our community, on our police department, and our association since last year. And through this process, we felt it was super important to get more information out. As you all are aware, the grand jury proceedings are secretive, and so the things going on in there are not released to the public. I am very happy that we have David Roger as our general counsel. David Roger has been a part of this on our side with helping Officer Bookman through this entire process, as well as the rest of our executive board. And so with David's blessing on this topic, because he's been in the limelight so many times as the former district attorney, we thought it important to let the public know, from our perspective, more about this case. And that's why we're so happy you all came here today. David's going to do an amazing presentation that I really think is going to give a lot of clarity to folks. And like he said, we'll take questions at the end. So again, thank you so much for coming. Please grab your packets so that you have some more information from us. And I will turn it over to David.
Thank you. At the outset, I want to make clear that this is not a victory lap. This is a somber time. Obviously, Mr. Durham's daughter has lost a father, and that's not lost on us. We have empathy for her. Officer Bookman, we notified Officer Bookman last night about the indictment. He's certainly relieved that he's not going to be charged with murder. However, that's not the end of this for him. It'll be a long process. There will be a number of administrative hearings that Officer Bookman will go through that'll scrutinize his actions that evening. Mr. Durham's family has filed a civil lawsuit against Officer Bookman personally, so he'll have many days in federal court dealing with this, but he's certainly relieved today. And so the evidence that I want to present to you is evidence that some of you may not know. And you know, the department has a 72-hour hearing. They present you a kind of a synopsis of their investigation at the time, but there are a lot of things that unfold that continue throughout the investigation, and this is some of the evidence that was presented. So the parties, obviously, you don't need any reminder. Brandon Durham is the decedent. Alejandro Boudreaux was his former girlfriend and who was involved in this, and of course, Officer Alex Bookman. At the outset, and please understand, I'm not preaching, but I'm offering you some thoughts about different issues. And what I think is important, at least to us, is that there is a difference between civil liability and criminal liability. And there are times when those two things become meshed together. And civil liability is a civil lawsuit where people want money. And there is a different burden of proof and different courts that hear those cases. The Durham family has filed a civil lawsuit. They're asking for money. Criminal responsibility is a little different, and there's a higher burden of proof. Criminal responsibility deals with the potential loss of a person's liberty. There's a higher burden of proof. And I want to kind of give you an example, and that is federal law dealing with civil rights. Everybody's heard about civil rights lawsuits. It is 42 U.S.C. 1983, and we hear about that cause of action, that litigation in use of force cases, and that is one of the charges I'm sure that the family has filed against Officer Bookman, and this deals with excessive force. Not always, but in this case it will. And the U.S. Supreme Court has defined what the plaintiffs have to prove, and they have to prove that Officer Bookman's conduct was objectively unreasonable. Stated differently, an objectively reasonable officer under the same circumstances would have done something different. And that's kind of a generic view of the 1983 action. The parallel criminal civil rights statute has similar language. However, because it is a crime, the standard is different, and there has to be some showing of criminal intent on the officer. And that is the thing that distinguishes civil cases from criminal cases. It's that there is some criminal intent. And the courts have said that with respect to the Civil Rights Act, not only does a plaintiff have to show that an officer's conduct was objectively unreasonable, but because it's a crime, they have to show that the officer specifically intended to use excessive force. And so we hear so often, you know, police officers are never charged, never convicted of crimes, and that is because officers are doing their job. We may disagree with their tactics, how they perform their job, but officers don't put on their badge and decide that they're going to go out and kill someone today. And so that is the difference. In a criminal case, you have to show not only that there is a killing, but that the officer had criminal intent, and that has been our position all along. People can debate on whether Officer Bookman's tactics were appropriate. Well, what we believe is indisputable is that Officer Bookman was doing his job and he did not have criminal intent. And that was the focus of this criminal grand jury investigation. Did Officer Bookman commit murder when he used deadly force? These are the statutes that the grand jury presumably was instructed on, and we say that because we weren't in the grand jury room, but when Officer Bookman was given notice that he was going to face an indictment, these were the charges, and it was murder. And the statute defines murder as the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. That is the criminal intent. That is the unlawfulness. That's what a grand jury had to consider over the last couple of months. Did Officer Bookman, was his use of force unlawful? Did he have malice in his heart, or was he doing his job? And the grand jury answered that question in the negative. They concluded that there was insufficient evidence that Officer Bookman committed murder. And that is what the criminal charges are all about. Here's another statute that talks about justifiable homicide by a peace officer. The statute says homicide is justifiable by a peace officer when it is necessary to protect against an imminent threat to the life of a person. There has been some discussion about whether Officer Bookman shot the wrong person. There's been a lot of talk about the red hoodie, and we're going to talk about that later in this presentation. But from Officer Bookman's perspective, when he told Mr. Durham to drop the knife, Mr. Durham posed a threat to his girlfriend. And in those seconds in which Officer Bookman had to make this decision, he believed that Mr. Durham was the aggressor. But make no mistake about it, whether you believe that Officer Bookman shot the wrong person, or you believe that Officer Bookman truly believed that Mr. Durham was the aggressor, the issue for the grand jury, a criminal grand jury, is whether Officer Bookman had criminal intent. And from our perspective, whether you believe that he shot the wrong person or you believe that he shot the aggressor, he didn't have criminal intent. And that's what the grand jury has been focused on. And you know, there will be a lot of discussion, there will be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking about what Officer Bookman did in those 2 seconds, but that will occur in a civil lawsuit. I want to talk about domestic violence, and all of you report about domestic violence situations all the time. Police officers and Clark County Metro officers respond to thousands of domestic violence calls every day. And when they respond to the call, they don't know who is going to be the aggressor, who was the initial aggressor, who is the aggressor at the time that they show up. They don't know whether both people are going to turn on them. What they do know is domestic violence situations are very volatile and they're heightened alert. And we know that Mr. Durham had a domestic relationship with Ms. Boudreau in October 2024. Whether they lived together or not, they had a domestic relationship. And the couple agreed to terminate their relationship just days before this shooting. And Mr. Durham purchased a plane ticket for his girlfriend to move back to Florida. She had the plane ticket, and on the night before, relatively night before, within probably 28, 36 hours, Mr. Durham called the police to have his girlfriend removed from the house. And officers responded, and Officer Bookman responded as well. As soon as they put the girlfriend in a vehicle to take her to the airport, Mr. Durham went online and canceled the flight ticket. And that is what precipitated this domestic dispute. And so when the female got to the airport, she found out that she did not have a ticket and that Mr. Durham had canceled the plane ticket, and that ignited her, her anger, her displeasure with him, and that's what caused her to ultimately go back to the house. When Mr. Durham heard the commotion, and let me back up and talk to you about this house. And so this is a one-story house. It originally had a garage. The garage was converted into what has been referred to as a man cave. And this was where Mr. Durham entertained his guests. And the garage had a front door to it. It had windows facing the street. It had a separate door that went from the man cave into the house. There was a digital lock on the door so that if someone wanted to go in from the house into the man cave, they would need to have the digital code. And Mr. Durham lived there with his daughter. When the girlfriend showed up, she was able to look inside. And this is a statement that police took from Alejandra Boudreau, the girlfriend, that evening of the shooting. She looked inside the blinds and she could see that Mr. Durham was with another female, and that made her even angrier. She says, "He knew it was me. He saw my face when I broke the window in the man cave. He was, you know the rest." Police also interviewed Mr. Durham's daughter that evening, and she said that she heard the commotion, and when she went from her bedroom towards the man cave, her father came out and said, "Crazy bitch," when he came out of the man cave, and she handed the phone to Mr. Durham to talk to 911. And during this commotion, the daughter also heard the girlfriend say, "Brandon, do you think you can screw me over?" So there's no question that Mr. Durham knew that the person who was tearing up his house and was breaking into his house was his former girlfriend. And that becomes important because we're going to next talk about his call to 911, and he doesn't mention anything about the girlfriend, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why that may have been the case. And this is really the answer from our perspective. Mr. Durham was high on methamphetamine throughout this incident. During the autopsy, they took blood samples from Mr. Durham. He had 500 nanograms per milliliter of methamphetamine in his system at the time of his death. He had 155 nanograms per milliliter of amphetamine in his system, which is the metabolite. Methamphetamine breaks down through the metabolization process into amphetamine, which means at some point the levels of methamphetamine in his system were higher than that. He also had Cialis on board. When detectives conducted a search of the house, they searched the man cave, and they found 19 grams of methamphetamine in the man cave. They found 2.5 grams of ecstasy in the man cave where he did his entertaining, and they found a 0.5 gram of Xanax as well. And so from our perspective, this explains a lot about Mr. Durham's actions that evening. And please understand, we're not suggesting that Officer Bookman knew some of this information. What we are saying is that this evidence corroborates Officer Bookman's perception in those few seconds that Mr. Durham was the aggressor in that incident, that he was holding this female and had a knife close to her throat, close to her carotid arteries. This is from the toxicology report. We had an expert, and you'll see in the packet that we had an expert conduct an analysis of the toxicology, but this is the medical examiner's toxicology report. Blood levels of 200 and 600 nanograms per milliliter have been reported in methamphetamine abusers who exhibited violent and irrational behavior. High doses of methamphetamine can also elicit restlessness, confusion, hallucinations, circulatory collapse, and convulsions. This is the medical examiner's toxicology report. Now, we don't know what Mr. Durham's mindset was at the time. We can draw certain inferences from his conduct in light of the fact that he had this much methamphetamine in his system, but he had 500 nanograms per milliliter of methamphetamine, and experts have said that people have exhibited aggressive behavior, violent behavior, and have hallucinated when they have those levels of methamphetamine in their system. And so this is an example of how his state of mind might not have been his right state of mind. This is his call to 911. When he knew that his girlfriend was the person outside trying to break in, he says, "These two people out here is killing, shooting guns at my house." There were no two people. There were no guns. So was he hallucinating at that time? What we do know is Mr. Durham was high on methamphetamine when he made that call. He says they already killed someone. Nobody was killed in that house. Was he hallucinating? We don't know, but what we do know is he was high on methamphetamine. He said a family member was shot inside the house. That was false. But the point is that he was high on methamphetamine. He denied knowing the two shooters, and he was told by the 911 operator who stayed on the call with him throughout that police were coming. And by the way, this was not the first time that Mr. Durham had called Metro for assistance. We know that a day earlier he had called police. They arrived and took care of the problem. Police records show that police were out to his house on prior occasions, and not to sully his reputation, but he was also arrested for domestic violence in his house by Metro. And so the point of it is that he knew that when you call police, they are going to arrive. But he was high on methamphetamine. When officers arrived, officers heard a loud commotion, blood-curdling yells from inside the house. They saw a propane tank in the front yard. They saw that a small window had been broken next to the door, and Officer Bookman and the other officers made the decision that they had to go inside the house to save someone's life. And that's exactly what they did. And Officer Bookman was the first through the door. You've seen the body-worn camera. There are narrow hallways, and as he's going down the hallways, they're trying to check doors, which is standard protocol. At one point, there's no noise, and then they hear noise again, but throughout, they're yelling, "Metro Police! Metro Police!" And so Mr. Durham called the police. He knows the police show up when you call the police. He heard, or should have heard, them yelling, "Metro Police." He's on the call with 911. There should be no question that Mr. Durham knew that the person who was telling him to drop the knife was a police officer. Officer Bookman obviously was the first in the hallway because this hallway was so narrow. Other officers were behind him. And what he saw was Mr. Durham encircling the female's shoulders and neck with both arms. He is bladed off behind the female, and he has, according to Officer Bookman, control of the knife. At that point in time, his attention is focused on Mr. Durham and the knife. We can talk about the red hoodie later, but at that point in time, Officer Bookman knows that someone is in danger, and he believes, from his perspective, that it is Mr. Durham who has the knife. One of the photographs will be from the crime scene, and so if you're filming this live, I'm giving you a little warning ahead of time. So this is a screen grab from Officer Bookman's body-worn camera. And as you can see, Mr. Durham is somewhat behind his girlfriend. He has both arms around the girlfriend. The knife appears to be in his hands, and it is inches away from the female's carotid artery. This is what Officer Bookman is looking at the time when he recognizes that he's going to have to take some action. And he tells Mr. Durham twice, "Drop the knife, drop the knife." And he doesn't drop the knife. He has to make that decision, in his perspective, to stop a killing. Why didn't Mr. Durham drop the knife? We've already discussed that he was the one who called 911. He was the one who knew that police officers were going to respond. Did the methamphetamine, because he was high on meth, affect his ability to understand? Was he truly the aggressor at the time and wasn't going to drop the knife? What we do know is he did not drop the knife, and Officer Bookman had to make a decision to save someone's life. This is from his girlfriend. He was controlling. Yeah, I submitted, basically. I had let him form control to where the knife was still above my head. Now, obviously, Officer Bookman didn't know that at the time, but it does corroborate his perception that Mr. Durham had control over the knife and that he was the aggressor at that point. And here's something interesting. After the shooting, crime scene analyst recovered 2 knives from Mr. Durham's within his reach. They swabbed the knives, the knife handles, the knife blades, and they sent the swabs to the DNA lab for analysis. Mr. Durham's DNA was on the handle and the blade of both knives. His girlfriend's DNA was not found on either knife. His girlfriend's DNA was not found on the handle, not on the blade of either knife. Now you may say, so what? She introduced the knives. But an inference could be made by a trier of fact that Durham had control over both knives and the female did not. And so when you couple that with the body-worn camera video, with Boudreaux's statement and the DNA, it certainly corroborates Officer Bookman's belief that Durham was the aggressor at that time and he had to take action. You'll see in the following photographs, these are screen grabs, that Boudreaux recognized that it was the police who came in. She says, cops come in, he was control, my eyes are closed, I start saying a little prayer, and Boudreaux starts to drop to the ground, and Durham maintains control over the knife and the female. And here are a couple of photographs. And so as you can see, the girlfriend starts to drop. You see her hand, and so her hand is dropping. She recognizes that it is the police. And the question becomes, why didn't Durham drop the knife when police officers, people he called, told him to drop the knife? Perhaps it was because he was high on methamphetamine. Perhaps he was truly the aggressor at the time, that he's angry at his ex-girlfriend who was tearing up his house and threatening him with knives. And here's another screen grab where the girlfriend starts to drop down and Durham still has control over her and the knives. I'm not sure if the picture is coming up in the next screen, but certainly be aware. Durham refused to drop the knife. Officer Bookman has to make an assessment within a split second because Durham has a knife inches away from his girlfriend's neck as to whether he has to use force. And understand that he's not shooting to kill. He is shooting to stop the threat. All he wants to do is have Mr. Durham drop the knife. But at some point, within those seconds, Officer Bookman recognized that Durham was not responding to his commands. The female was, but Durham was not. He still had the knife. Why did he still have the knife? He was high on methamphetamine. In those split seconds, nothing changed. Durham still had control, still had the knife in his hand, still had control over the female, knew his police officers, and was not dropping the knife. Officer Bookman fired a single round, tried to fire high to avoid hitting who he believed was the victim at the time, the girlfriend. He didn't know whether he had struck Mr. Durham, but he sees Mr. Durham fall backwards along with the female, and Mr. Durham still has control over the knives. He believes that he has not stopped the threat to the female. And so he continues moving forward and fires additional rounds. And here's the picture of, you can see the girlfriend down here. This is Durham, and he still has the knife in his hands. This is what Officer Bookman saw, and this is why he continued to fire to eliminate the threat to this female. This is a crime scene photograph, and you can see a little bit encircled the two knives near Mr. Durham's hands. So in summary, Officer Bookman didn't put on his badge and gun that day thinking, I want to go kill somebody today. He would have much rather, I am sure, conducted his calls and gone home that evening. But he was forced into this situation. He felt, as well as the other officers, that he had to take action to save the female's life. And whether you believe, as I said at the beginning, that Officer Bookman shot the wrong person or shot the right person, the aggressor, the person that he believed was a threat to the female, there is no criminal intent. And while I was not part of the deliberations with the grand jury, from our perspective, we believe that there is insufficient evidence to establish that Officer Bookman had criminal intent. And from our perspective, his perception that Mr. Durham was the aggressor and that he posed a threat to the life of the female was justified under the circumstances. And we believe respectfully that the grand jury made the right decision. Now, let's talk about focused attention. There's been much made about the red hoodie, and that there is a description in CAD, which is computer assisted dispatch, which is information given to police officers that one of the suspects was wearing a red hoodie. And so there's been much made about, well, why didn't Officer Bookman see the red hoodie? From his perspective, it really didn't matter what people were wearing. He was focused on the knife. He was focused on the threat. He was focused on the person who refused to obey his commands to drop the knife. But we had an expert. This is a renowned expert, Dr. Bill Lewinsky. He started Force Science. He has done hundreds of scientifically reviewed studies on use of force and how officers react in use of force cases and under the stress. And he talked about a phenomenon of focused attention. And whether you call it tunnel vision or focused attention, he wrote, in moments of immediate threat, people can experience tunnel vision or a narrowing of visual attentional focus. This usually involves focusing on the most critical aspects of the incident to the exclusion of other elements that later may be glaringly obvious, but at the time appear less significant. There have been a number of studies. I was reluctant to include this in the PowerPoint because I don't want to trivialize what happened. But one of the first studies that you can find on YouTube is one by Simmons and Chabris, C-H-A-B-R-I-S, in 1999, Selective Attention. And in that case, they took a number of people. They told them to concentrate on a certain item, and at the end of the video, they were asked, how many times the individuals did a certain thing. And then the scientist or the expert said, well, did you notice X? And they go, 50% of them said, no, I didn't recognize X. And he showed the video and go, oh yeah, now I see it. And so, if you feel you have the time, go look up some of these videos about focused attention. But the point of the matter is that what the individuals were wearing, the fact that Mr. Durham was wearing whatever he was wearing and he was naked, the fact that his girlfriend was wearing a red hoodie and a black whatever was irrelevant. What was relevant was that Durham had a knife to the throat of his girlfriend, and he wouldn't obey Officer Bookman's commands. That was what was relevant. That was what focused his attention, and that was what was important at the time. He had split seconds to make a decision on whether he had to use force to stop the threat. And he was focused on the knife and the person who he believed was holding the knife. And that is selective attention. And so for months we've heard about the red hoodie from our perspective, from the experts' perspectives, and perhaps even from the grand jury's perspectives. The red hoodie was irrelevant. What was relevant was that a human being was holding a knife to another human being's neck, and he wouldn't drop the knife. And Officer Bookman had to make that difficult decision to try to stop the threat. And that is selective attention. And so we want to thank you for coming. We hope that at least you walk away recognizing that there's a different perspective to this case. We trust that some information probably was not given to you at that 72-hour hearing through no fault of the departments, but nevertheless, some of this evidence, I presume, was presented to the grand jury. I know that Officer Bookman testified. I know that Dr. Lewinsky testified, and I know that one of our internal experts, Chad Lyman, testified as well. And with that, I'll open it to questions. Yes, sir.
My name is Joshua Figueroa with Channel 8. You know, I know this was a Clark County grand jury, not a jury trial. So were you at all surprised that Bookman wasn't indicted, since considering this is a grand jury and not a jury trial?
You know, we neither Officer Bookman nor the PPA take anything for granted. We recognize that the grand jury has a great deal of latitude. Their burden of proof is lower than what is required for a conviction. We obviously respect their decision. They heard a great deal of evidence. I presume that they took this matter seriously. There were 2 prosecutors assigned to the case to present the case. I wasn't in there. And so, you know, we respect the grand jury's decision.
David Roger, Kristen Drummond with News 3. I know you're saying that Bookman was focused on someone holding a knife to another person. However, this is a man who's defending himself in his own home. So what do you have to say to Durham's family and to the public who are trying to protect themselves in their own home, while they call police asking for help, and they're the ones who get shot?
When the police say drop the knife, drop the knife.
But it was split seconds. And some are saying that there wasn't even enough time for Durham to even respond.
Mr. Durham knew from past experience that when you call the police, they show up. Mr. Durham called the police on this occasion. This isn't where a neighbor called the police. He called the police asking for them to come. What I do know is that he was high on methamphetamine. Was his judgment clouded at the time? Was he actually the aggressor? We know from experts that when you're high on methamphetamine, you can be aggressive and violent. Was he torqued at that particular time with the female tearing up his house? Was he the aggressor at the time? From Officer Bookman's perspective, it was. And so the answer to the public is that when you call police and they tell you to drop the gun, drop the knife, then do it.
But in your own home, defending yourself.
You have a right to self-defense, but when you call the police and the police arrive, you obey their commands. You obey their directives. And so we can debate this forever, Kristen. And I know that in civil court, they will review it. But understand, with due respect, that the focus of the grand jury is whether Officer Bookman committed murder. That is the focus. We can debate tactics somewhere down the road, but grand jurors who take an oath to listen to the evidence objectively and determine whether there is probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed did so. And I think that it does a disservice to them to change the conversation and I'm not directing this to you, but this is in general, change the conversation to the castle doctrine and everything else. The point of the matter was that Mr. Durham called the police. He was high on methamphetamine. When they arrived as he requested and told him to drop the knife, he didn't drop the knife.
I do have a follow-up to that because, I mean, granted, there was a bunch of damage to the home when police arrived there. You could tell there was something going on. Alexander Bookman is much larger than Brandon Durham, right? So in the case where there's a struggle over a knife and Durham is shot and killed and he falls to the ground, potentially when you said, oh, that's when Boudreaux starts falling as well, it's probably just the dead body weight at that point, right?
No, that is not correct. If you look at those photographs, Officer Bookman had not fired the shot yet, and the girlfriend started to drop down. You see her hand drop down. She had not been shot. She was never shot, and Durham had not been shot either. And so I recognize that there will be a lot of people who will want to take this step by step and do a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. And you know, perhaps that's what makes our system good. That's why you are here as reporters, to ask those questions and so that the public knows. What I am telling you is that Officer Bookman did not commit a crime. He did not commit murder.
I guess the question I had is, you know, to be clear, I know did Bookman see Durham as a threat to Boudreaux or also to his life as well? Did Bookman also feel threatened?
No. Officer Bookman recognized that Mr. Durham had a knife blade inches away from the female's carotid artery. Durham was not a threat to Officer Bookman at that point in time. That's not to suggest that if Mr. Durham had cut loose with the female and was one-on-one with the officers, that he might become a threat to them. Because as we all know, that when people have knives and they're within, it used to be 21 feet, but it's now a lot less, they may be a threat to the officer. But at that point in time, Officer Bookman was concerned with the girlfriend's safety. Yes?
When you watch the video, you know, you see the gunshot and they fall to the ground. They may have already been falling towards the ground, like you mentioned, with Boudreaux ducking down. But then a beat passes and then there's several more gunshots. Could you explain that, and if we know which shot was the one that actually killed him?
To take your last question first, we don't, or at least I don't know, what was the lethal shot. From Officer Bookman's perspective, he believed that Mr. Durham continued to be a threat as he fell down, and he had the knives still in his hand, and the female was right next to him. And so it was one continuous transaction.
David, I just want you to help us kind of understand and see what we're also seeing in the body cam footage and also in those images. Well, with what we're seeing, it seems like Durham was trying to protect himself, holding out Alexander Boudreaux's hands, and it appears in the images that she's holding the knife, trying to protect himself from her. What still allowed Officer Alexander Bookman to believe that Durham was the aggressor at that moment?
Officer Bookman believed that Durham was the aggressor because of his stance behind the girlfriend, both arms around the female, the fact that it appeared to him that he had the knife, and the fact that Mr. Durham didn't drop the knife when he was ordered to do so by police.
But real quick, how could he drop the knife if maybe he wasn't holding it at that time? What if she was holding that knife?
Well, first and foremost, we're piecemealing this case, right? And that's the way you do an analysis of the case. Officer Bookman, at that point in time, believed, from his perspective, that it was Durham who had control over the knife. And we know that Durham continued to have the knife because when he fell backwards into the bedroom, he still had both knives. And you saw a photograph of that.
David, we know Bookman responded to the house the night before. He interacted with Durham. He also interacted with Boudreaux. So a lot of people in the community are questioning, why didn't he recognize who the homeowner was, Durham, in the house, as you mentioned, in the split-second decision. So knowing the homeowner may be trying to defend himself.
all of that becomes irrelevant when Officer Bookman sees that Mr. Durham has control over the knife, control over the female, and Mr. Durham does not drop the knife. And so, as I said in the beginning of this presentation, when we're talking about domestic violence cases, the aggressors and the victims can change momentarily. And Officer Bookman didn't have time to start analyzing who was who at the time. There was plenty of time for that to have taken place if Mr. Durham had dropped the knife. He refused to drop the knife because he was high on methamphetamine. And so they could have sorted all of this out. All Officer Bookman wanted to do was to stop the threat.
So I've got to follow up because you mentioned drugs. Weed, marijuana is legal here in Nevada. People can do it in their homes. So if someone were to call the police, they get into a situation, they're trying to defend themselves, while meth is illegal, I mean, should people be worried now about if they have narcotics in their system that they may be the victim of an unfortunate tragedy?
It's very simple. When you call police, police respond and they say, drop the knife, drop the weapon, drop the knife, drop the weapon. You've got nothing to worry about if you remember that.
You said that Alexander Bookman wasn't shooting to kill, but Brandon Durham was shot in the head.
He was shooting to stop the threat. And so Officer Bookman aimed higher to not shoot the person he believed was the victim.
Does it matter?
Kind of moving forward, can you just explain to us what's next for Officer Bookman? And also, can you describe to us, from hearing from some of the officers that are part of this association, is there any concern moving forward in terms of when they respond to highly volatile calls like this one, just judging by the body cam video? What action they take? Are they concerned that it's going to be relitigated or litigated on TV or newspaper, whatever?
Can you repeat the question? There were multiple questions.
Well, I guess to
so
start, what's next for Bookman?
So what is next for Officer Bookman is that the department will conduct a vast array of independent reviews of his actions. And so there is a use of force board that will convene to review his actions. There's a tactical review board that will convene to determine whether his actions were appropriate. From there, the sheriff will have to take those findings and determine whether he should face discipline or lose his ability to be a police officer with Metro. And so there are a lot of internal reviews. After that, the district attorney will hold, and I always get this wrong, but it's a public hearing where the evidence is presented to the public, generally at the Clark County Commission. And then from there, if the department decides that Officer Bookman should be able to keep his job, then he'll have to go through a fitness for duty board where they will have to get a report from the psychologist, and every officer who's involved in use of force has to see the department psychologist to determine whether they're fit to return to duty. The board makes that decision, and then Officer Bookman will have to undergo training because he's been off the streets for such a long time. So there's an extensive process. In addition to that, there's the civil case, and so Officer Bookman was sued not just as a police officer, but in his personal capacity. So he will go through the process in federal court, and whatever happens there happens. And so this is just the beginning for Officer Bookman.
A determination like yesterday's might increase the black community or minority community's lack of trust in law enforcement. What do you have to say to that?
I'll answer your question. Going back to your question, I think that there are some officers, I apologize, but I didn't want to forget the second part to his question. There are some officers who may hesitate, and that's dangerous. It's dangerous for the community. It's dangerous for the officers. But that's just kind of the nature of this process. But with respect to your question, we can't change the way the community views us. So we hope that by this presentation, as the eyes and ears of the community, that there will be some don't want to say balancing, but some disclosure about this new evidence. But we leave it to your discretion. Yes.
I do have just one more follow-up, sorry. Throughout this process with Alexander Boudreau, I know that she had told police, I was hoping to die, almost like suicide by cop. Was that ever taken into consideration throughout this investigation?
That was not, she didn't say that to Officer Bookman. And the focus of this grand jury investigation is whether Officer Bookman committed murder. And from his perspective, he was doing his job. He didn't have criminal intent. And so, you know, as I've said a couple of times, whether you believe that Officer Bookman shot the wrong person, or you believe that Officer Bookman was justified in believing that Mr. Durham was the aggressor, there is no criminal intent. This is not a criminal case. They can debate all of this in civil court, and they will.
Does it matter at all that, you know, when Bookman told him to drop the knife, he is frozen, and a lot of people, that is their natural thing, you know, fight, flight, freeze. He's not actively trying to make a movement towards Bookman or towards Boudreau. Does him being frozen matter at all?
It suggests to me that he was high on methamphetamine, and he wasn't comprehending what Officer Bookman was saying, or he truly was the initial aggressor.
But at the time,
But it
the
appears
officer
he
did
did
not
not
know.
de-escalate.
I'm sorry.
At the time, the officer did not know that he was on those drugs, correct?
That is
So
correct,
how-
and I said that at the very beginning, to be fair. What we are doing is we're presenting evidence to you that you may not know of, and that, from our perspective, corroborates Officer Bookman's thought process. And so Officer Bookman did not know that he was high on meth. What he did know was that he had control over the female, he had a knife inches from the female's throat, and he refused to drop the knife. And he had to make a split-second decision on stopping the threat to save a life.
But
Chris?
some would say he did not de-escalate the situation, or at least give it enough time.
You know, there are times when you can de-escalate, but when you have a volatile situation, people are yelling and screaming in the house, there's broken windows, and there's a call for the police, and there's a knife inches from a female's throat, you don't have a great deal of time to de-escalate, because it's a matter of seconds before that knife blade goes into a carotid artery and someone is dead. And then, hold on, and then the police are criticized for not taking enough time. And so, was there de-escalation? He told him to drop the knife twice. Police officers are yelling when they come through the door, Metro Police, Metro Police. He called the police. And so this isn't something where the police just show up because a neighbor called and they don't know whether the police are coming. He called the police. Yes, did you have a question?
So my understanding from this is that the whole situation would have been way different from Brandon Durham if he wasn't high on drugs.
That's not what I said.
No.
I don't know what his, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I'm just saying, just given the fact that you presented that he had all this meth in his system, there was ecstasy, Xanax found, and you described like the milligrams he had or how much drugs he had in his system, and then it causes like hallucinations and things like that, and even the 911 calls. I guess what I'm inferring from it, and please correct me here, is that if there wasn't any drugs in his system, and you know, and the side effects of it, maybe this situation would have been different. Am I correct there?
The fact that he had a lot of methamphetamine in his system obviously impaired his judgment. It's not me. Those are the toxicology experts who were saying this. And so I can't tell you what was in his mind at the time. Maybe he was upset with the female. Maybe he wasn't comprehending. Maybe he was hallucinating. These aren't my terms. I'm not a toxicologist. I'm just a lawyer. But experts say that people with a high level of methamphetamine in the system have exhibited these types of characteristics.
But also, he was in his boxers. I mean,
They weren't boxers.
underwear.
I don't even know if they were underwear, but nevertheless,
He's a half-naked man.
it really didn't matter, just like the red hoodie didn't matter. What mattered is he had a knife to a female's throat, inches away, and he refused to drop the knife.
The same person who broke into his house. So you have a person who, some would say, is defending himself, his property, and he ends up getting shot.
All of that is fine. You have a right to self-defense, but when the police show up, when you call the police, they yell Metro Police, and they say, drop the knife, and you don't drop the knife, then Officer Bookman, from our perspective, was justified in believing that Mr. Durham was the aggressor. And so your question is a good question. I don't mean to minimize what you're saying, but those are all issues for a civil court. What we're talking about is, did Officer Bookman commit murder with use of a deadly weapon? And the grand jury said no.
David, what do you have to say to people who may now, as a result of this, be worried about calling police for assistance if an intruder does go into their home and they're just trying to protect themselves against this intruder?
You know, I understand that you say that there may be some people. From my perspective, law-abiding people who aren't high on meth will recognize that when you call the police and they arrive and they tell you to drop the weapon, you drop the weapon.
Do we know he was high on meth at that time, or could that meth have just been in his system? Because it lasts a couple, I think, 48 hours.
He had a high level of methamphetamine in his system. Some had metabolized, but go out and talk to doctors. Don't trust a lawyer, Officer Bookman's lawyer. But the toxicology reports suggest that people with that level of methamphetamine could exhibit these characteristics: hallucinating, violence, aggressiveness. This isn't, perhaps you're trying to draw an analogy to marijuana, where there are still components in a person's system days after, and that, you know, they may not be impaired at the time. I think that you will find, if you talk to experts, when you're talking about methamphetamine and those levels of methamphetamine, he was impaired, he was high. Thank you. I didn't mean to be snarky with you, just a little wound up here.
What has Officer Bookman told you?
I'm sorry, Kristen.
Yeah, I want to ask about the grand jury trial. Did Officer Bookman testify at the grand jury trial, and were there any expert witnesses who testified in his favor there?
Yeah, and I provided you a package. This package, one part is a letter that we presented to the prosecution outlining, from our perspective, what the exculpatory evidence is, which is our right under the statute. The other is our presentation. And so, you know, Officer Bookman testified, Dr. Lewinsky testified at the hearing, and Chad Lyman, one of our many internal experts here at PPA in use of force and tactics, testified.
Does Officer Bookman have any remorse?
When you say remorse, it would suggest that he was at fault. He obviously is saddened by this traumatic event. He recognizes that there is, obviously, Mr. Durham lost his life, recognizes that his daughter was present when he lost his life, and so, you know, he's not a robot. He has feelings as well.
David, can you explain again? I know we've already asked this plenty of times, but when both Durham and Boudreaux fell to the ground, why were there additional shots fired?
Officer Bookman was trying to stop the threat that what he perceived Mr. Durham posed to the female. After they fell to the ground, he was not aware whether he had hit Mr. Durham or not. What he was aware of was that Mr. Durham still had control over the knife, and that the female was right next to him. And in that package, you also have a photograph, which is a screen grab from his body-worn camera, and you can see that Mr. Durham still had the knife. And so this was one continuous effort to stop the threat to the female's life.
If Bookman is reinstated as an officer, my question is, like, how does he move forward, knowing all this that's in the news and it's out there about what happened? How does he move forward as an officer, and, you know, and be a trusted colleague to the public, not to his internal colleagues, because obviously, you know, he wasn't indicted, but how do you do that? How do you move forward as an officer, Bookman?
I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, I'm just a lawyer. You know, Officer Bookman, despite what some people in the public may feel, is a good young man. He was devastated that evening. We have a bus out in the parking lot that you see at every crime scene. He was back in the bus, alone, just devastated. Not devastated because of his predicament somewhere down the road. He was devastated because he had to take a life. And no officer that I'm aware of, that I've ever dealt with, comes into my office and says, got another one today. They're human beings. They have feelings. He felt badly. And so how does he move forward? I don't know. But, you know, there are a lot of people who support him. The members at PPA support him. Steve Gramis supports him. There are support groups. He will have the benefit of a psychologist or psychiatrist to help him through this process. But that's the best I can give you. Kristen, you got another question. Go ahead.
I was going to say, how will the union prepare for potential backlash following this?
I trust that the general public, if they are presented the rest of it, the evidence, will understand that Officer Bookman was doing his job. Will there be groups of people who will never accept that explanation? Of course, and we will deal with that as it comes. All right, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your coverage of this. We appreciate your openness to hearing other evidence in this case, and thank you for coming.